It's Thursday, November 20th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, he signed it. The president actually signed the bill to release the Epstein files this week, which, to be honest, I was not expecting. But that doesn't mean Americans are just going to get their hands on the files now. So I'm going to explain what happened since Tuesday, what happened last night, and then what happens next here with these files, because there's a lot of noise out there about what's actually going to get released and how. But first, make sure that you're subscribed or following the show, whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like and subscribe and leave a comment below and hit the bell for notifications if you're on YouTube and you're a watcher there. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It is a great time to become a paid Substack subscriber. It is just $5 a month, or better yet, sign up for the entire year for just $50. You get access to all sorts of original reporting and analysis. I might have a new one coming out a little later this week. It has been a very news-heavy week, and there's just stuff that I cannot get to in the show. Plus, I've got a new newsletter coming out very soon that you're not going to want to miss. That's a part of Make It Make Sense, but does a little more sense-making, if that makes sense. I think I've said that enough now. Anyway, make sure that you're signed up to be a paid subscriber for the Substack right now. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod. All one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. All right, let's get to the show. You know, with the holidays around the corner, we're all going to parties, whether it's with your family, maybe it's a Friendsgiving, or the office holiday party where you're never really sure what to bring. Well, cookies will always do the trick. And with Molly B's gourmet cookies, you can bring bold, artistic craft cookies to your next party or even just to your own pantry. Each cookie is made in small batches to ensure a melt-in-your-mouth texture, exceptional quality, and unforgettable flavors. The Straight Fire, the one I like, marshmallows, chocolate, cinnamon cereal, and just a little bit of cinnamon whiskey. The Be Cordial is a delicious blend of chocolate and cherry. Or the Naughty Cookie, just in time for the holidays. It's a rich, warm chocolate, a subtle hint of spice, topped with fluffy mini marshmallows. It is the perfect balance of naughty and nice for this season. So whether gifting or just indulging on your own, Molly B's cookies elevate any moment, bringing gourmet delight to your pantry with no cookie shop required. And now you can enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code MIMS25 at Molly B's to get 10% off your next order. Now, Make It Make Sense does get a commission off that sale, but you get to support the show and you can wow all your guests at your next party. Molly B's gourmet cookies, bold, unforgettable flavors. They're the ultimate treat for any occasion. So about an hour after Tuesday's episode hit your feed, half of what I said went right out the window because the Senate unanimously passed the House bill to release the files Tuesday night. At the time I recorded Tuesday's show, it looked like Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and the president had been leaning on the Senate Majority Leader John Thune to make changes to the bill to release the Epstein files. Now, those changes would have gone back and forth between the House and the Senate before they hit the president's desk, which at that time there was no guarantee that he would sign them. But that meant this entire thing wouldn't have been over till like February. But none of that is going to happen now because Minority Leader Chuck Schumer brought what's called a unanimous consent bill to the Senate floor just hours after the bill to release the files passed the House. Those kinds of unanimous consent bills are done by what's called a voice vote, which is exactly what it sounds like. Senators just shout out yays or nays. It also means there's nothing on the record, so we don't know how individual senators voted. Now, the important thing here is that the majority leader is the person in the Senate who is a Republican right now, and John Thune, who is in control of deciding which and when bills get put on the calendar that then get to the floor. Meaning Schumer worked this thing out with John Thune to be able to bring it to the floor so quickly. Now, Schumer doing it gives him a win with Democrats who are actively calling for the end of his political career, and it gives Republicans, though maybe not Thune so much, some cover in doing what is clearly not what Mike Johnson or Donald Trump wanted to or thought was going to happen. Here's how Mike Johnson reacted to the news when he was asked by the MSNBC, or I guess MS Now, reporter after the state dinner with the Saudi Crown Prince on Tuesday.
Any reaction to Leader Thune seeing the bill without adding amendments or changing it?
I am deeply disappointed in this outcome. I think I've been at the state dinner. I don't know. I was just told that Chuck Schumer rushed it to the floor and put it out there preemptively. It needed amendments. I just spoke to the president about that. We'll see what happens.
So do you think he may veto it? You say you spoke to the president?
I'm not saying that.
Is he supportive of it in its current form?
We both have concerns about it, so we'll see. I was standing there with the Crown Prince. We couldn't call him.
Are you frustrated in the majority leader? Are you upset with the majority leader?
So yeah, that is not the face or voice of a man who got what he wanted. And there's a real fear for Johnson about what happens next, because on the one hand, Johnson just went through a really embarrassing few months of jumping to attention every time Trump told him to when it came to the Epstein files. Johnson's been giving away a ton of the check and balance power the House has over the White House. And then this week, the entire chamber of Congress that Mike Johnson is in charge of just rebuked what he wanted, which was not to vote on this bill, in a nearly unanimous vote. 98% of the House voted to release these files. I will say Johnson included here because he's got to go with the flow on this. But those kinds of votes, 98%, those are the only kind of votes that are reserved for like naming post offices after war heroes. We never see that in major national pieces of legislation like this. And then after that, Mike Johnson was hit with insult to injury by his counterpart in the Senate, ignoring what Johnson asked that they do. So for Johnson, this entire thing was pretty politically neutering. On the other hand, for the president here, he was also clearly hoping that it would take a long time for this bill to get through Congress, expecting that it would be changed to help the administration more easily redact or retain certain documents and maybe get used as a bargaining chip in the fight over health care, which is on the horizon here in the next month, or maybe even the fight to keep the government open at the end of January when the current continuing resolution that we just agreed to is up. Instead, what the Senate did was send the bill directly to the president's desk, putting him in a really bad spot if you're Donald Trump. See, he's been fighting tooth and nail not to have these files released, but he can't veto the bill. The idea of fighting the deep state and elites and the child trafficking cabals of the world because he's been sent by God to do it, that idea, more or less, depending on the person, is central to the MAGA movement and Trump as their leader. But if he didn't do anything at all, the bill would still become law within 10 days, whether Trump wanted it to or not. So last night, he signed it, posting that in the middle of a very long post on Truth Social, where he continued to maintain that the Epstein files were solely a problem for Democrats like Bill Clinton or Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary and former president of Harvard. To be sure, it's a problem for them and many of the other people who enabled them in the Democratic Party for decades. But generally speaking, across polls from the last few months or so, Democrats care a lot less about the Democrats in the Epstein files being held to account than Republicans care about Trump being held to account, meaning Democrats would not mind if Bill Clinton was held to account, and Republicans very much would if Trump was. It's also worth pointing out that in the recent release of 23,000 documents from the Epstein estate, more than anyone else, Trump is mentioned, more than Epstein himself. He's mentioned 628 times. That's more than 4 times more than Bill Clinton and more than 13 times more than Larry Summers, though one incriminating mention is obviously too many in these, and not all of the mentions are incriminating or questionable either, including those mentioning Trump. But there are a number that do implicate the president, which I wrote about last week on the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's also worth noting here that because the Epstein files are so central to Donald Trump's entire movement, you'd expect some sort of promises made, promises kept kind of bill signing ceremony in the White House or in the Oval Office, which he's done a lot of since becoming president and loves doing in front of the cameras. But we didn't get one of those here. We didn't even get a photo of him signing it. Instead, we got an announcement about it on Truth Social, which isn't even listed in the top 25 on the Apple App Store for social media apps, which means it's outranked by apps with the names like Wiz with 2 Z's or Widgetable for besties and couples. Anyway, now that Trump's signed it into law, it is law, and the Department of Justice has to start working on how to release these files, which it hasn't said anything about how it's going to do that just yet. We do know that there is a timeline, though. The Department of Justice has 30 days to release the Epstein files. They are allowed to withhold or redact documents that are deemed classified, part of ongoing investigations, that could release child pornography or could put the personal information of victims and survivors at risk. They are not allowed to redact or withhold any evidence or names to avoid embarrassment or for political reasons. But for the things they do redact, they have to provide reasons within 15 days of releasing the files. And the main thing you're hearing right now is that these files have already been redacted, hidden, or worse, destroyed. But let's take those kind of one at a time here. We know that the FBI has been working since about March to redact the Epstein files. That was put in writing by a whistleblower who sent that to the Senate, who said more than 1,000 FBI agents working 24-hour shifts had been pulled from their regular investigations, some of them terrorism and child trafficking related, to then comb through more than 100,000 documents to flag Trump's name, likely for redaction because Bloomberg got its hands on a redacted page where they actually missed Trump's name but had redacted everything else. And then we got this from Epstein's brother earlier this week.
What I do want to talk about is I've been recently told the reason they're going to be releasing these things and the reason for the flip is that they're sanitizing these files. There's a facility in Winchester, Virginia, where they're scrubbing the files to take Republican names out of it. That's what I was told by a pretty good source.
So he's talking about the Bureau's central records complex, where the files, and in fact most FBI files, are kept. But I also want to say it's not really clear that Epstein's brother would really have a bunch of insight into this, and I did hesitate in even putting that clip into this episode, but I do think it's worth pointing out because the notion that over the last few months redactions have continued is one that you can put stock in, and maybe not even for any nefarious reason, but only because it's been pretty clear for quite a while now to the FBI and everybody else that these files were going to get released and they needed to get a jump on the redactions to protect actual survivors and victims. But the thing about all these redactions is that 15-day explanation thing. It's highly unlikely the FBI is keeping track of why certain records were being made last spring, which means unless they make up a bunch of reasons for these redactions, which FBI agents are not going to want to do, and if they do, then whistleblowers will definitely come forward, the DOJ is going to have to comb through all these records again. And if they don't get to all of them within 30 days without an extension of some kind from Congress, the files have to be released. So there could very well be things that just fall through the cracks, which get released, or could get over-redacted, which gets to the next thing, that the files are going to be hidden or worse, destroyed. Members of Congress have said that there are multiple copies of multiple parts of the files that are being held outside of the DOJ's investigation. We got some of that last week from the dump from Epstein's estate. That means that there are copies to compare to what the DOJ releases, and you know that people with those copies are going to be doing some comparing and contrasting when the DOJ releases its own files. And that's a pretty good incentive for the Justice Department to be upfront about what's being released, especially because the release is now being ordered by law. If the president had just ordered the release or declassification of these files, which honestly he could have done at any time without Congress forcing him to do it like this, that probably would have been an easier thing to get around when it came to hiding certain elements of the Epstein files. But now that it's law, not releasing something for non-congressionally valid reasons would be illegal. And that same notion goes for if the files were being destroyed somehow. Now, there are people who say that nothing real is going to get released here because of the open investigations that were just opened last week into Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, and Epstein's lawyer Reed Weingarten. And the DOJ doesn't release files amid ongoing investigations for some pretty obvious reasons, but generally you don't do that. But that means in an ironic twist of fate here, it would mean the most high-profile documents or records would be those about Trump. It would be like putting a spotlight on him instead of this being an issue for the Democrats or just steamrolling everybody, and the press included, with more than 100,000 pages. And again, if the DOJ withheld something, whistleblowers would likely come forward, and so would the people who have copies of the files. And then you get this from Thomas Massie, the Republican congressman from Kentucky, who said he would just out the names of the men on the so-called client list or in the files if these files don't get released honestly.
Documents will ultimately come out, even if the president tries to fight this.
Yes, I'm confident. And we sort of, we know when they're out because we know what some of these lists, who some of the men are. I don't have the names in my head right now. The ultimate thing that we could do is read the names on the floor of the House and that could happen, but what needs to happen is the FBI needs to release these names.
Is that something you might do if he resists this, if the DOJ releases this? Could you go to the floor and read these names?
We absolutely would do that. Marjorie would do that. I would do that. There are Democrats who would do that.
We absolutely would do that. I mean, that's huge. I will say he did also say this after the House vote, but still, that's a real threat from a congressman who at this point has nothing to lose because he's been a constant target for Trump. Now, Donald Trump is unmatched when it comes to winning for losing. A loss is never a loss, and if it is, it never happened. And I have no doubt that he might find a way to wriggle out of the worst of what's in these files, and his rock-solid supporters will be fine with that. I've written about before that Trump might even try to say some of these things are made-up AI Democratic hoaxes, although the copies of those things would get in the way of that. But all of this really does paint Trump into a corner where there aren't a lot of good options for him to save face and turn this around, which is kind of always what the Epstein files were going to be. I never really understood why he couldn't see that. Now, maybe the thinking here is that these files get released just before the holidays, people check out from the news to spend time with their families like they should, and it fades into the background for the next 11 months before the midterms, meaning the files aren't this thing that are hanging over Republicans' heads. But given the way Trump and other Republicans have been acting about these files up until he signed this bill, and they were trying their best to deflect and redirect, Trump is really worried about the release. And in signing this bill, he may have just signed away whatever political juice he had left, no matter what he thinks he might be able to do going forward. All right, that's it for today's episode. Please rate or review the show, whatever podcast app you're listening to it on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and leave a comment below if you're on YouTube. It really helps out the show. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a bunch of exciting things coming up in the next few weeks. You're not going to want to miss out. A full year subscription is just $50, and it really helps keep this show independent and keep it going. If you don't want to do that, I get it. The holidays are a tough time to spend money like that. Please share the show on social media to help spread the word. It's Mims News Pod. It's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.